People believe the Mongols destroyed Baghdad because they were violent conquerors burning everything in their path. Historians describe it as a military catastrophe, a sacking, a massacre. They miss the point entirely. The Mongols did not destroy Baghdad by accident. They did not burn it in a fit of rage. They executed a calculated financial assassination. They targeted banks. They demolished irrigation canals. They murdered the engineers who knew how to rebuild them. This was not conquest. This was economic erasure. In February 1258, the Mongol army did not simply kill a city. They killed a financial system 5 centuries in the making. They redirected global wealth flows for the next 800 years. Baghdad in 1258 was not wealthy because it had gold. It was wealthy because it controlled the bottlenecks. Every spice shipment from India, every silk caravan from China, every piece of paper containing commercial law, scientific knowledge, and banking practice flowed through Baghdad. The Abbasid Caliphate had built infrastructure on 3 levels. First, physical infrastructure, 10,000 miles of irrigation canals turning desert into farmland. Second, financial infrastructure, banking houses issuing letters of credit honored from Morocco to Malaysia. Third, knowledge infrastructure, the House of Wisdom holding accumulated technical expertise worth more than gold. The Mongols understood this. Their generals had advisors who mapped trade routes, identified banking centers, and targeted the engineers maintaining the irrigation system. This was structural warfare. They attacked the machinery of wealth creation, not the wealth itself. Gold and silver they seized, but the systems producing wealth for 5 centuries, those they erased permanently. You are watching Noob Historian. The official story is the first lie. The money trail is the first truth. You live in the aftermath of February 1258. The destruction of Baghdad created an economic vacuum at the center of the medieval world. Trade routes shifted, capital migrated westward. Venice and Genoa filled the void Baghdad left behind. These Italian city-states accumulated the wealth and financial expertise enabling Europe's commercial expansion and eventual colonial dominance. The banking techniques Baghdad pioneered did not disappear. They migrated to Florence and Amsterdam. They evolved into modern financial instruments. The global economic system placing Western institutions at its center traces back to the moment Mongol cavalry shattered Baghdad's gates. When economists discuss why the Middle East remains economically dependent on oil extraction rather than diversified production, they describe conditions created in 1258. The irrigation systems destroyed by Hulagu Khan never recovered. The agricultural surplus feeding Baghdad's commercial economy never returned. You pay for groceries using financial instruments descended from Baghdad's banking innovations. But Western institutions captured those innovations because Baghdad burned. This is the story of how one city's destruction changed where money flows for 800 years. And where money flows, power follows. Before you understand what died in 1258, you need to understand what lived. Baghdad in 1250 CE controlled more concentrated wealth than any city on earth. The historian Ibn al-Athir, writing in his chronicle Al-Kamil fi al-Tariq in 1231, documented a city of over 1 million residents. Contemporary London held 40,000 people. Population alone did not create wealth. Financial systems did. The Abbasid Caliphate operated history's first fully integrated commercial banking network. Merchants in Baghdad deposited gold with banking houses called jahbad. These bankers issued sack documents, the direct ancestor of the modern check. A merchant in Baghdad received a sack, traveled 3,000 miles to Samarkand, and cashed it at a corresponding banking house. No European institution matched this capability for another 400 years. The sack system solved the central problem of long-distance trade, moving value without moving gold. Gold was heavy, gold attracted bandits, gold needed armed guards, paper weighed nothing and meant nothing to thieves lacking the banking relationships to cash it. This financial infrastructure produced a commercial velocity unmatched anywhere on Earth. Ships arrived at Basra, carrying goods from India, China, and East Africa. Camel caravans departed for Damascus, Cairo, and Constantinople. Banking houses financed these operations. Profiting from interest payments, Islam officially prohibited, but commercial necessity demanded. The Abbasid system developed legal workarounds. Murabaha contracts structured loans as purchase and resale arrangements with markup replacing interest. Mudaraba partnerships split profits between investors, providing capital, and merchants providing labor. These instruments created debt financing without the name. European merchants encountered the system and marveled. When Italian traders arrived in Baghdad, they found sophistication exceeding anything in Christendom. They learned, they copied, they waited for their opportunity. The geographic position of Baghdad made it irreplaceable. The city sat at the intersection of 3 trade routes spanning continents. The Silk Road from China terminated at Baghdad. The spice route from India and Southeast Asia reached Baghdad via Basra and the Persian Gulf. The African trade in gold, ivory, and slaves flowed through Baghdad from Egypt. No alternative routing existed. The Arabian Desert blocked southern passage. The mountains of Anatolia and Persia blocked northern passage. Everything funneled through the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. Baghdad controlled the bottleneck. This geographic monopoly produced tax revenues financing the most expensive government on earth. The Abbasid Caliph maintained a palace complex rivaling any structure in human history. The court employed 10,000 servants. The army numbered 100,000 soldiers. The treasury held gold reserves accumulated over 5 centuries of continuous taxation on global trade. Contemporary accounts describe wealth beyond European comprehension. The Caliph's throne room featured a tree made of gold and silver with mechanical birds singing through hidden pipes. The palace grounds contained zoological gardens with animals from 3 continents. The libraries held 400,000 volumes when the largest European library contained 600. This wealth did not represent consumption. It represented surplus. Baghdad's economy produced so much revenue that, even after funding the military, the bureaucracy, and the construction projects, gold accumulated in the treasury faster than the government spent it. The Cairo Geniza documents from Jewish merchants operating in this period confirm the commercial scale. Contracts recorded in these archives show individual trading operations moving tens of thousands of gold dinars. Partnership documents, structured investments spanning multiple years and multiple continents. Legal disputes referenced commercial regulations of extraordinary sophistication. Baghdad was not a wealthy city. Baghdad was the financial center of the medieval world. Every major transaction passed through its banking houses. Every commercial law referenced its legal scholars. Every weight and measure calibrated to its standards. And in 1258, all of it burned. Baghdad's wealth did not materialize from air. It grew from soil. The agricultural surplus of Mesopotamia funded everything. Without food production exceeding local consumption, no city of 1 million people existed. Without exportable grain, no trade balance favored Baghdad. Without irrigation, no agriculture functioned in the desert climate. The Sawad, the black earth agricultural region surrounding Baghdad, represented history's most engineered farming terrain. For 3,000 years, successive civilizations built, maintained, and expanded a canal network transforming desert into cropland. Robert Mackesy, Adams, and Thorkild Jacobson documented this infrastructure in archaeological surveys conducted during the 1960s and 1970s. Their data, published in Land Behind Baghdad and Heartland of Cities, quantified the scale of agricultural engineering. The canal network totaled over 10,000 miles of waterways. Main canals drew water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Secondary canals distributed water to agricultural zones. Tertiary canals delivered water to individual fields. The system operated through carefully maintained gradients, requiring constant attention to siltation, bank erosion, and water level management. This infrastructure required institutional knowledge. Engineers understood flow rates, seasonal variation, and silt accumulation patterns developed over generations. Administrative systems coordinated maintenance across thousands of square miles. Legal frameworks allocated water rights among competing agricultural interests. The Abbasid state employed a dedicated bureaucracy managing irrigation. Tax revenues funded annual dredging operations. Engineering schools trained replacement personnel. Written records preserved technical specifications accumulated over centuries. This system produced agricultural yields unmatched anywhere in the medieval world. Mesopotamian wheat fields generated enough surplus to feed Baghdad's million residents while exporting grain to regions with deficits. Date palm plantations produced fruit for domestic consumption and export. Cotton fields supplied textile manufacturing. Rice paddies in the southern marshes added diversity to the agricultural base. The agricultural surplus translated directly into commercial advantage. Baghdad's merchants exported grain to Arabia, where desert conditions prevented local production. They exchanged agricultural products for gold, which accumulated in the banking system, financing trade expeditions to India and China. This economic cycle repeated for 5 centuries under Abbasid rule. Agricultural surplus funded trade. Trade produced profits. Profits funded infrastructure maintenance. Infrastructure maintained agricultural surplus. The second layer of infrastructure was commercial. Baghdad contained the physical facilities supporting international trade. Caravanserais provided secure lodging for merchant caravans. Warehouses stored goods awaiting sale or transshipment. Marketplaces organized commerce by commodity type, creating efficiency in price setting and quality control. The textile district alone employed tens of thousands of workers. Silk weavers produced luxury fabrics for export to Europe. Cotton producers supplied everyday clothing for regional markets. Carpet manufacturers created products carrying premium prices for centuries after production. Manufacturing knowledge passed through guild structures regulating quality and training apprentices. These guilds preserved techniques developed over generations, protecting trade secrets while ensuring consistent output. The accumulated expertise represented capital as valuable as the physical facilities. The third layer was institutional. Baghdad housed the schools, training the lawyers, doctors, engineers, and administrators, operating the commercial system. The House of Wisdom, the Abbasid Library and Translation Center, preserved and transmitted the knowledge enabling everything else. The House of Wisdom held texts in Arabic, Persian, Greek, Sanskrit, in Syriac. Translation projects had converted Greek philosophy, Indian mathematics, and Persian administrative manuals into Arabic over the preceding 4 centuries. This accumulated knowledge represented capital as valuable as gold. Engineers trained at Baghdad's schools built and maintained irrigation systems throughout the Islamic world. Lawyers trained in Baghdad's legal academies administered commercial law from Morocco to Indonesia. Physicians trained in Baghdad's medical schools treated patients across 3 continents. The destruction of Baghdad would not simply remove a city from the map, it would destroy the institutional infrastructure, training the personnel operating Islamic civilization's economic machinery. The Mongols approaching in 1257 knew this. Their intelligence networks had mapped the commercial geography of the Islamic world for decades. They understood what they intended to destroy. The Mongols did not appear suddenly. They announced their approach through decades of systematic destruction. In 1219, the Mongol army under Genghis Khan invaded the Khwarezmian Empire, the state controlling Persia and Central Asia. Ibn al-Athir, the historian whose chronicle provides our primary documentation, called this the greatest catastrophe history had produced. The Mongol methodology emerged during the Khwarezmian campaign. They did not seek tribute or submission. They sought annihilation. Cities surrendering peacefully saw their populations deported and their structures demolished. Cities resisting saw their populations massacred and their structures burned. The economic component of Mongol warfare was explicit. Genghis Khan's military targeted productive infrastructure systematically. In Khwarezm, Mongol forces destroyed irrigation systems serving agricultural regions, creating permanent economic decline. Cities rebuilt, populations recovered. But agricultural productivity never returned because the engineering knowledge maintaining irrigation died with the engineers. The Mongol army spent the following decades consolidating control over Persia, fighting campaigns in Russia and Eastern Europe, and building the administrative capacity for their next target. Baghdad watched and waited. Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, received command of the Western Campaign in 1253. His orders were explicit: destroy the Abbasid Caliphate and eliminate Baghdad as a political and economic center. Hulagu assembled the largest Mongol army in history for this single objective. Contemporary sources estimated the force at 150,000 soldiers, though modern historians suggest 100,000 is more accurate. Either figure represented overwhelming military superiority over any force the caliph had available. The army included specialists beyond cavalry. Chinese siege engineers brought gunpowder weapons and siege machinery. Persian administrators provided intelligence on Baghdad's defenses, population, and wealth. Mongol generals who had studied Baghdad's commercial networks advised on targets for destruction. Rashid al-Din, the Persian vizier, who later wrote the official Mongol history Jami al-Tawarik, had access to Mongol imperial archives documenting the campaign's planning. His chronicle reveals the systematic intelligence operation preceding the assault. Mongol agents had mapped Baghdad's defenses, counted its garrison, estimated its treasury holdings, and identified key infrastructure targets. The assault was not improvised. It was engineered with the precision of a financial audit. The caliph, al-Mustasim, received multiple warnings. He responded with denial. Baghdad's walls had never been breached. The caliphate had survived previous invasions. God protected the commander of the faithful. This complacency proved fatal. The caliph refused to mobilize full military resources, relying on a garrison of perhaps 20,000 soldiers to defend a city of over 1 million against an army 5 times larger. Diplomatic efforts failed. The caliph sent envoys threatening the wrath of God against any who attacked the seat of Islam. Hulagu responded with demands for complete submission, demolition of Baghdad's walls, disbanding of the army, and personal submission of the caliph to Mongol authority. The caliph refused. He believed the Islamic world would rally to Baghdad's defense. He believed the Mongols would not dare attack the religious center of Islam. He believed wrong. In November 1257, Hulagu's army departed from Hamadan in western Persia, advancing toward Baghdad along multiple routes. Northern columns crossed the Tigris above the city. Southern columns crossed below. The Mongol army would surround Baghdad and eliminate all escape routes before beginning the assault. The speed of Mongol movement prevented any relief. By January 1258, Baghdad stood alone. No army marched to its aid. No diplomatic intervention materialized. The greatest city in the world faced destruction with only its own inadequate garrison for defense. The caliph's vizier attempted a defensive sally on January 17th. Mongol forces destroyed the Abbasid army in the field, killing or capturing most of the garrison. Baghdad now had neither walls strong enough to resist siege nor soldiers sufficient to man them. The siege began on January 29th, 1258. It would last 12 days. The aftermath would last 800 years. The siege followed Mongol methodology refined over 40 years of conquest. Chinese engineers assembled siege equipment within view of Baghdad's walls, trebuchets, catapults, and gunpowder weapons, arrayed against defenses designed before such technology existed. The walls of Baghdad had defended against Arab armies and Persian cavalry. They had never faced concentrated artillery bombardment. Mongol sappers dug beneath the walls while artillery fire prevented defenders from interfering. The double wall system protecting Baghdad, once considered impregnable, crumbled under combined assault. Sections of the eastern wall collapsed entirely. Mongol forces breached the eastern walls on February 5th. Fighting continued in the streets for several days, but the outcome was determined. The Caliph's remaining garrison, outnumbered and out-equipped, held positions but lacked the strength for counterattack. On February 10th, 1258, al-Musta'sim surrendered. Hulagu Khan ordered the systematic destruction of Baghdad. What followed was not random pillaging. It was organized economic warfare executed with administrative precision. The Mongol army divided Baghdad into sectors. Units received specific assignments for wealth extraction and infrastructure destruction. The operation proceeded with military discipline. The treasury fell first. 5 centuries of accumulated gold, silver, gems, and precious objects transferred to Mongol control. Rashid al-Din's chronicle describes wealth beyond counting. Gold coins filling warehouses, silver ingots stacked to ceilings, gems sorted by type and quality. The caliph was forced to reveal hidden treasures under threat of torture. Gold reserves accumulated over generations became Mongol property in days. The banking houses fell next. Mongol soldiers emptied vaults and burned records. Commercial contracts, partnership agreements, and letters of credit became ash. The documentary infrastructure enabling trade across the Islamic world disappeared in hours. Merchants in distant cities holding sack issued by Baghdad's banks found their paper worthless. The physical commercial infrastructure followed. Warehouses burned with their contents. Silk worth fortunes fueled fires. Spices accumulated from years of Indian Ocean trade became smoke. Market buildings collapsed under deliberate demolition. Caravanserais became rubble. The facilities enabling Baghdad's role as a trade center ceased to exist. Manufacturing capacity received attention. Textile workshops burned with their looms. Metalworking facilities were demolished. The skilled artisans operating this equipment died alongside their tools. Centuries of accumulated technique disappeared with the practitioners. Then came the population. Contemporary sources describe the massacre in terms suggesting hundreds of thousands killed. Modern historians debate specific numbers, but the magnitude remains clear. The commercial class, the educated elite, the skilled artisans, the banking families, the engineering corps, all targeted for execution. Hulagu reportedly exempted Christians and Jews, who had provided intelligence during the campaign. Nestorian Christians and Jewish residents were permitted to shelter in designated areas, but the Muslim majority population faced systematic killing. The city's million residents became perhaps 100,000 survivors. The House of Wisdom burned. 400,000 volumes accumulated over 5 centuries became ash. The translation projects preserving Greek philosophy and Indian mathematics ended. Original manuscripts existing nowhere else in the world turned to smoke. The schools training engineers, lawyers, and physicians closed permanently. The irrigation infrastructure received specific attention. Mongol forces destroyed canal headworks where water entered the system. They breached embankments controlling flow. They killed the engineers maintaining the system and burned the documents recording maintenance procedures. This was not accidental damage. Mongol commanders understood irrigation systems from their destruction of Khwarezmian agriculture 40 years earlier. They knew breaking the canal infrastructure produced permanent economic decline. They knew killing the engineers prevented reconstruction. This was their method. The Sawad, the Black Earth agricultural heartland of Iraq, began its transformation from farmland to desert. Without maintenance, canals silted. Without water, crops died. Without crops, population starved or migrated. The agricultural surplus funding Baghdad's commercial economy for 3 millennia began its permanent disappearance. The Caliph himself received special treatment. Mongol custom prohibited spilling royal blood on the ground. Hulagu had al-Musta'sim wrapped in carpets and trampled by horses. The religious and political leader of the Islamic world died without a drop of his blood-touching earth. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had ruled Islam for 5 centuries, ended with a rolled carpet and horse hooves. By late February 1258, Baghdad was a corpse. Its population was dead or scattered. Its wealth was plundered. Its commercial infrastructure was rubble. Its agricultural base was dying. Its accumulated knowledge was ash. The city serving as the world as financial center for 5 centuries ceased to function as an economic entity. It would not recover for 700 years. The destruction of Baghdad created a vacuum at the center of global commerce. For 5 centuries, trade routes had converged on Baghdad. Merchants had structured their operations around Baghdad's banking system, Baghdad's commercial law, and Baghdad's market infrastructure. The sudden disappearance of this center threw international commerce into chaos. The Cairo-Geniza documents from the decades following 1258 record the commercial upheaval in precise detail. Jewish merchants who had operated through Baghdad-based networks scrambled to establish alternative arrangements. Letters reveal canceled contracts, lost shipments, and broken partnerships. Merchants demanded payment for goods delivered years earlier to Baghdad warehouses now destroyed. Trade did not stop. Demand for Asian luxury goods in Europe continued. Supply from Indian and Chinese sources continued, but trade restructured around alternative centers because the old center no longer existed. Cairo emerged as the primary beneficiary. The Egyptian capital had served as a secondary commercial hub under Abbasid dominance. After 1258, Cairo became the primary node for trade between Asia and the Mediterranean. The Mamluk Sultanate controlling Egypt exploited this windfall, taxing commerce previously routed through Baghdad. The Red Sea route gained importance. Ships carrying Asian goods increasingly bypassed the Persian Gulf, sailing instead to Egyptian ports on the Red Sea coast. Goods then traveled overland to Cairo or Alexandria. This shift moved the commercial bottleneck from Baghdad to Cairo and the narrow waterway separating Asia from Africa. Venice and Genoa recognized the opportunity. Italian merchants who had traded through Islamic intermediaries now sought direct access to Asian goods. The collapse of Baghdad's commercial networks created openings for European penetration of trade routes previously controlled by Muslims. The Venetian and Genoese commercial archives from this period document the strategic pivot. Italian merchants negotiated directly with Mongol successor states, bypassing what remained of Islamic commercial institutions. They established trading posts in the Black Sea region, accessing the northern Silk Road routes the Mongol Empire now controlled. The famous journey of Marco Polo to China, beginning in 1271, would have been impossible before Baghdad's destruction. The Mongol Empire's consolidation of Central Asia, combined with the collapse of Islamic intermediary networks, created routes previously closed to European merchants. The Polos walked through doors the Mongols had forced open. European commercial expansion into Asia during the late 13th and 14th centuries was not predetermined. It resulted from the specific destruction of Baghdad's gatekeeping function. When the gate fell, Europeans walked through. The gold seized from Baghdad entered circulation through Mongol channels. The Ilkhanate, the Mongol successor state controlling Persia and Iraq, spent Baghdad's accumulated treasure on military campaigns, administrative costs, and luxury consumption. Gold flowed outward from Mongol treasuries to merchants supplying goods. European merchants, increasingly integrated into Mongol commercial networks, captured portions of this gold flow. Venice and Genoa accumulated capital previously concentrated in Baghdad's banking houses. This capital accumulation funded the commercial expansion defining late medieval Europe. The agricultural collapse of Iraq produced long-term consequences, exceeding the immediate destruction. Without irrigation maintenance, the canal systems deteriorated over decades. The Mongol successor states lacked the institutional knowledge to repair damage. The engineering schools producing trained personnel had burned with the House of Wisdom. No graduates emerged to replace the murdered engineers. Archaeological surveys by Adams and Jacobson documented the progressive abandonment of agricultural land throughout the late 13th and 14th centuries. Land cultivated continuously for 3 millennia became desert within a few generations. Population collapsed as food production failed. Entire districts supporting thousands of farmers became uninhabited wasteland. Iraq remained depopulated and impoverished for centuries. The region supporting the world's wealthiest city became marginal territory producing nothing of commercial value. Later rulers attempted reconstruction, but lacked the accumulated knowledge the Abbasids had possessed. Oil would eventually restore economic significance, but agricultural prosperity never returned. The knowledge destruction proved equally permanent. The texts burned in the House of Wisdom were irreplaceable. Translation projects had consumed centuries of scholarly effort. Accumulated commentaries and analyses represented generations of intellectual labor. The burning took hours to complete what had taken centuries to create. Some texts survived in copies held elsewhere. The European preservation of Arabic translations of Greek philosophy enabled later recovery of certain classical works. But unique manuscripts, original research, and institutional knowledge existed only in Baghdad. They burned with everything else. The Islamic world's scientific leadership ended with Baghdad. The astronomical observations, mathematical advances, and medical innovations pioneered by Islamic scholars slowed dramatically after 1258. The institutions producing researchers no longer existed. The libraries supporting research had burned. The patrons funding research were dead. European institutions would eventually claim scientific leadership, building partly on recovered Islamic scholarship preserved in Spain and Sicily. The scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries drew on foundations laid by Islamic scholars. But the Islamic world no longer produced the innovations. It had lost the infrastructure. The destruction of Baghdad did not merely end an era. It began a wealth transfer continuing to the present day. The immediate effect was geographic redistribution. Gold, silver, and commercial capital concentrated in Baghdad for 5 centuries dispersed rapidly after 1258. Mongol treasuries captured initial wealth. European merchants captured subsequent flows. The center of economic gravity shifted westward and never shifted back. Venice achieved commercial supremacy in the century following Baghdad's fall. Venetian merchants dominated Mediterranean trade, accumulating the capital financing further expansion. The Venetian banking system, modeling practices learned from Islamic predecessors, became the most sophisticated in Europe. The Arsenal of Venice, the state shipyard, became the largest industrial facility in the world. The techniques Baghdad pioneered migrated with the capital. Letters of credit, partnership structures, and commercial law concepts appeared in Italian practice during the 13th and 14th centuries. European merchants had observed Islamic banking methods for generations. After 1258, they implemented their own versions without Islamic competition. Florence built on Venetian foundations. The Florentine banking houses of the 14th and 15th centuries, including the Medici and the Bardi, operated using instruments derived from Islamic models. They added innovations, including double-entry bookkeeping, creating the financial infrastructure enabling European commercial expansion. The capital accumulated by Italian city-states funded the explorations of the 15th century. Portuguese voyages around Africa and Spanish voyages across the Atlantic required financing beyond the capacity of royal treasuries. Private capital, accumulated through centuries of commercial profit, funded the ships sailing to India and America. This capital traced back to the wealth transfer initiated by Baghdad's destruction. The gold seized from Baghdad's treasury circulated through Mongol networks, reaching European merchants, accumulating in Italian banks, and eventually financing ships sailing around the world. The trajectory is direct and documented. The European colonial empires of the 16th through 20th centuries built on foundations established in the 13th century. The commercial techniques, accumulated capital, and geographic positions gained after Baghdad's fall enabled subsequent expansion. Each stage built on the previous one. Baghdad's destruction was the first stage. The Middle East, stripped of its commercial infrastructure and agricultural productivity, became peripheral to global trade. The region controlling international commerce for 5 centuries became a transit zone for European traders accessing Asian markets. When Portuguese ships rounded Africa and reached India directly, even the transit function disappeared. The Ottoman Empire, which eventually absorbed the former Abbasid territories, never restored Baghdad to its previous significance. The Ottomans focused on Constantinople and the Mediterranean, not on rebuilding Mesopotamian agriculture. The irrigation systems remained ruins. The canals remained silted. The desert reclaimed what the Mongols had destroyed. Oil changed the equation in the 20th century, but the structural position remained. Middle Eastern economies extract resources for export rather than adding value through manufacturing or services. This pattern mirrors the post-1258 condition: wealth extraction without productive infrastructure. The oil wealth flows outward to purchase goods produced elsewhere, then accumulates in Western financial institutions. The 2003 Iraq War demonstrated the continuing relevance of 1258's lessons. The destruction of Iraqi state institutions, infrastructure, and accumulated knowledge echoed Mongol methodology 8 centuries later. The difficulty of reconstruction illustrated how institutional knowledge, once destroyed, resists recovery. The same geography experienced the same pattern. Baghdad in 2003 had never fully recovered from Baghdad in 1258. The irrigation systems destroyed by Hulagu Khan remained ruins. The agricultural productivity of ancient Mesopotamia remained lost. The city housing 1 million residents in 1258 housed 4 million in 2003, but without the economic independence of its medieval predecessor. Modern Baghdad imports food rather than exporting it. Modern Iraq remains dependent on oil exports, lacking the diversified economy Baghdad commanded before the Mongols. The structural weakness created in 1258 persists through political upheavals, colonial periods, and independence. The infrastructure destroyed in 12 days has not been rebuilt in 8 centuries. The lesson extends beyond Iraq. Financial centers appear permanent until they collapse. The accumulated systems, knowledge, and infrastructure creating economic concentration require continuous maintenance. Destruction is faster than construction. Recovery requires more time than initial development. London, New York, and Singapore occupy positions analogous to Baghdad in 1258. They serve as bottlenecks in global financial flows. They concentrate expertise, infrastructure, and capital accumulated over generations. They appear permanent. Baghdad appeared permanent in 1257. 1 year later, it was rubble. The systems you rely on for banking, commerce, and economic security trace through Venice, Florence, Amsterdam, and London back to the vacuum created in 1258. The wealth transfer, begun by Hulagu Khan, continues through every transaction denominated in Western currencies, processed through Western banks under Western commercial law. You are downstream of February 1258. The destruction of Baghdad created the channels through which wealth flows today. The financial instruments in your wallet, the banks holding your savings, the commercial laws governing your transactions, all trace ancestry to the vacuum Baghdad's destruction created and the European institutions filling it. Understanding this history reveals your position in flows established 800 years ago. You did not choose these channels. They were cut before you were born, before your grandparents were born, before your nation existed. The Mongols cut them in 12 days of destruction, and 8 centuries of wealth have flowed through them since. The The Mongols destroyed Baghdad in 12 days. They redirected global wealth flows for 8 centuries. The financial center of the medieval world became a cautionary example proving a simple truth. Nothing concentrated is safe, nothing permanent is guaranteed, and nothing flows through the same channels forever. Until someone breaks the dam, then everything flows somewhere new.